In 1973, America invested $40 million in a high-speed train intended to revitalize its railways, only to find itself prohibited from operating it at fast speeds. The E60 originated from a flurry of bureaucratic urgency, promoted as an elegant successor to the celebrated GG1. It was prematurely introduced during the oil crisis, its design incorporating a modified coal hauler into a passenger engine. Early trials quickly unveiled a dangerous flaw. At 100 miles per hour, the new Premier locomotive vibrated so violently that it endangered both the tracks and its occupants. Rather than ushering in a new era, this government-backed creation was subjected to a humiliating speed restriction. What truly transpired behind this ill-fated rescue attempt? And how did this significant engineering misstep ultimately secure Amtrak's longevity? To understand this, we must begin on the Northeast Corridor, at the moment when the old legends started to fade. The GG1 was more than just a machine. For nearly 4 decades, it served as the backbone of the Northeast Corridor. This 475,000-pound streamliner, with its artistically curved form, was renowned for its tireless operation, regardless of weather conditions. Crews held them in high regard. Seasoned rail workers still recall the comforting hum of a GG1 along the tracks, the cabin warmed by its own steam, and its horn echoing through urban canyons at dawn. However, by the early 1970s, this legend was showing its age. Welders in Wilmington and Sunnyside spent more time repairing cracks than running trains, with some frames exhibiting foot-long fractures. Penn Central's shop logs documented over 60 units with structural cracks in a single year. The best among them had already covered 2 million miles. The others were so worn that mechanics joked they remained operational purely out of habit. Each GG1 concealed asbestos insulation wrapped around its pipes. By 1973, new safety regulations mandated masks for crews even during brake inspections. The Federal Railroad Administration identified more than 100 safety defects in the fleet, including fractured frames, failing motors, and loose insulation. Availability plummeted below 70%, leading old-timers to fear that any given run could be their last. The oil crisis led to a doubling of passengers, yet the engines ferrying them were operating on borrowed time. In the workshops, the mood was grim. A replacement for the GG1 was urgently needed. No one wanted to be the last engineer to witness a legend's demise. In the spring of 1973, fuel lines stretched for blocks, and news anchors cautioned about rationing. As oil prices quadrupled overnight, the nation's highways emptied, and the venerable train stations of the Northeast filled to capacity. Amtrak ticket counters observed crowds reminiscent of the war years. Within months, ridership on the Northeast Corridor doubled. Trains that had run half-empty for decades now had passengers standing in the aisles. Every available car was recommissioned, but the aging GG1s simply could not cope. Politicians in Washington began hosting press conferences on platforms, promising a new era of modern rail. The message was unequivocal. America needed to reduce its reliance on oil, and quickly. Electric trains suddenly became the patriotic solution. Amtrak's board faced increasing pressure from Congress and the public for immediate results. The customary years-long process of research and design was bypassed. Officials demanded a substitute for the failing GG1s, and they wanted it on the tracks as soon as possible. The urgency of the oil crisis left no room for caution. In the boardrooms, the question was not about identifying the optimal locomotive, but rather about what could be built immediately using existing components. General Electric wasted no time presenting its expedient solution. With Amtrak in desperation and time running out, General Electric sales representatives stepped forward in 1973, armed with blueprints for their E60C, a locomotive originally designed for transporting coal across the Arizona desert. Their promise was straightforward. bypass years of research and custom engineering by adapting a proven freight hauler for the Northeast's busy passenger lines. The Black Mesa and Lake Powell E60C had just entered service, hauling 80-car coal trains over steep gradients at a consistent 35 miles per hour. It was a robust machine. 6 axles, 6,000 horsepower, and a frame engineered to withstand the harshest desert conditions. General Electric engineers contended that with minimal modifications, adding a second cab, integrating a steam generator for older passenger cars, and adjusting the gearing for 120 miles per hour, they could deliver an entirely new electric fleet in just 12 months. This was 2 years faster than any European alternative. Amtrak's board, feeling congressional pressure and witnessing the deterioration of the GG1 locomotives, saw a lifeline. No one desired a 3-year wait for an imported model. The sales literature emphasized American strength and prompt delivery. The specifications appeared sound on paper. A 193-ton locomotive, ready-made for electrified tracks, capable of hauling the nation's heaviest trains. The contract for 26 units was signed, totaling nearly $40 million. The urgency of the oil crisis rendered the shortcut irresistible. Officials convinced themselves that the freight-oriented E60 could be transformed into a passenger champion. The specifics, its weight, rigid trucks, and the fact that its original design had never exceeded the speed of a city bus, were dismissed in the haste to deploy anything new on the rails. For General Electric, it represented a golden opportunity. For Amtrak, it was a gamble driven by speed, not prudence. The E60 didn't merely inherit its fundamental structure from a coal hauler. It also acquired a suite of passenger additions that amplified its weight and complexity. Engineers extended the single-cab freight frame to over 71 feet and incorporated a second cab, enabling the locomotive to operate in either direction without needing to be turned. This additional cab alone contributed several tons to the machine's mass. To ensure the older passenger cars remained warm, a substantial steam generator was bolted inside the body. This was no lightweight, modern heating system. It was a complete steam boiler, replete with water tanks and piping, wedged into the core of an electric locomotive. The boiler alone weighed over 20,000 pounds, with the water supply adding even more. The E60CP variant carried all this extra hardware solely to bridge the gap between the old steam-heated coaches and the emerging electric era. Furthermore, the design team replaced the original freight gearing with a set theoretically capable of propelling the locomotive to 120 miles per hour. This alteration necessitated more robust motors, heavier drive components, and reinforced support throughout the underframe. Every new system, whether for comfort, control, or speed, increased the final weight. By the time the first E60 was rolled out, it weighed 193 tons, only marginally lighter than the original coal hauler, but substantially heavier than any passenger locomotive in Europe or Japan. All these modifications were intended to transform the E60 into a versatile, modern machine. Instead, they created a paradox. A train designed for high speeds, yet burdened with the mass and rigidity of a freight brute. The contract mandated 120 miles per hour, but the reality was a locomotive so heavy and inflexible that even the slightest curve became a nerve-wracking challenge. Engineers had constructed a machine that appeared ready for the future, but beneath its gleaming paint, it bore the consequences of every design compromise made along the way. Test runs along the Northeast Corridor commenced with great optimism and a fresh paint job. But it wasn't long before anxiety began to mount in the cab. The first time the E60 was pushed past 100 miles per hour, the entire locomotive began to lurch violently from side to side. This wasn't a gentle sway, but an abrupt, unpredictable oscillation. Engineers termed it truck hunting, and at those speeds, the rigid 6-axle trucks, directly adopted from a coal hauler, clashed with every curve and joint in the track. The coffee cup trick became legendary. Placing a cup on the control stand at 105 miles per hour would cause it to slide across the metal, rattle against the window, and plummet to the floor. Inside, the cab felt like a runaway carnival ride. Test crew reports vividly describe the sensation as being tossed between invisible forces, with metal screeching as the wheels slammed first left, then right, then left again. Accelerometer data revealed lateral forces surging far beyond what the rails could safely endure. Inspectors examining the tracks post-run discovered loosened spikes and splintered wooden ties where the wheels had repeatedly struck. At 110 miles per hour, the entire train seemed perilously close to derailing. One engineer, gripping the throttle with white knuckles, murmured, "We're going to derail." The evidence was clear in both the data and the physical trauma. The E60 was not merely unstable, it was perilous. Every test exceeding 100 miles per hour devolved into a precarious venture, and news quickly spread through the rail yards. The new brick might be too heavy for its own good. The Federal Railroad Administration acted swiftly following the high-speed test failure. In February 1975, one of the new E60s derailed during a run near Elkton, Maryland. Inspectors meticulously examined the track and locomotive, uncovering evidence of severe lateral motion, newly dislodged spikes, damaged ties, and marks where the wheels had repeatedly impacted the rail. The test data presented a stark conclusion. The E60's rigid six-axle trucks were exerting such immense pressure against the rails at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour that the track structure itself was at risk of fracturing. Within weeks, the Federal Railroad Administration issued an urgent directive. Its wording was unambiguous. No E60 could operate above 90 miles per hour, effective immediately. The contract had stipulated 120 miles per hour, yet the government's own safety authorities determined that the new flagship locomotive was too perilous to operate at its intended speed. Amtrak's proudly proclaimed high-speed locomotive was now legally slower than the Metroliners it was meant to supersede. News of the restriction broke in the national press. Reporters vigorously questioned Amtrak executives and General Electric spokespersons. Headlines branded it a $40 million embarrassment. In the train yards, engineers obscured their speedometers with a prominent red 90. The message was unmistakable. This was no swift steed. The E60, conceived as a testament to American ingenuity, was now definitively a grounded behemoth, constrained by a speed limit. The ignominy for the railway was absolute. All that remained was to determine the fate of a fleet of embargoed locomotives. The restriction descended abruptly, but Amtrak was not prepared to surrender. Maintenance teams received their directive. Employ any means necessary to extract greater velocity from the E60s. The initial remedy was a period of waiting. Mechanics spent weeks meticulously perforating the thick steel frameworks, hoping to shed every conceivable ounce. They extracted the steam generators, vestiges of the GG1 era, and sealed the vacant spaces. This alone reduced the mass of the heaviest units by nearly 11 tons. Engineering memoranda from that period resembled a catalog of desperate measures. Lighter electrical wiring, thinner body panels, even replacing the cab seating with flimsier alternatives. The costs rapidly accumulated. Amtrak channeled millions more into these modifications, pursuing the elusive 120 miles per hour benchmark. Each alteration entailed increased downtime in the workshops and additional expenditures. Maintenance logs from Wilmington indicated E60S sidelined for weeks at a time, awaiting replacement components or partially completed upgrades. Despite these efforts, the maximal speed barely shifted. The inflexible bogies, the true underlying issue, could not be lightened or exchanged without a complete architectural overhaul. After all the endeavor, the E60S continued to vibrate violently at speeds exceeding 90 miles per hour. While executives in Washington approved budgets, the yard personnel understood the reality. No amount of drilling or tinkering would transform a slab into a projectile. Amtrak's forbearance eventually waned. Following years of financial investment and attempted rectifications on the E60, the quest for a genuine high-speed locomotive shifted internationally. In 1977, a Swedish import, the ASERC-4, arrived for evaluation. It embodied everything the E60 was not: compact, lightweight, and engineered from its inception for rapid passenger transport. Where the E60 plodded on 6 inflexible axles, the Swedish design utilized 4 adaptive bogies that hugged the tracks at speed. The disparity was immediately apparent. The RC4 prototype, swiftly rebranded as the AEM7, effortlessly navigated tests at 125 miles per hour without any trace of the dreaded instability. Coffee mugs remained stationary. The cacophony of straining metal and a jarring cab were no more. Amtrak's procurement division acted decisively. They finalized the licensing agreement with ARIA to construct the AEM7 locomotives domestically. By 1980, the new fleet was operational along the Northeast Corridor. The AEM7 weighed half as much as the E60, yet it propelled trains more rapidly, smoothly, and with fewer malfunctions. Engineers affectionately dubbed it the toaster due to its blocky appearance, but passengers were solely concerned with its velocity. For the first time since the GG1, American railways possessed a truly high-speed workhorse. The E60, once the fleet's pride, was quietly relegated. Its tenure as a flagship was concluded. The narrative of the E60 did not conclude with the mortification of its speed prescription. Once the AEM7 locomotives assumed the rapid routes, something unforeseen transpired. The venerable behemoth discovered its true purpose in demanding, arduous service. Conductors began specifically requesting the E60 when a train's weight overwhelmed the toasters. On frigid winter mornings, when snow accumulated and the timetable demanded 18-car consists for the clocker or the crescent, the E60 received the summons. Yard crews jocularly remarked that should a mountain need moving, the brick was the call. The mass that condemned it as a swift racer proved to be a boon for traction. Where lighter engines faltered and stalled, the E60 simply dug in and pulled. Engineers learned to confide in its tenacious grip, particularly on the extensive journeys to Atlanta or up to Montreal. In service logs, the E60S amassed mileage as the backbone of heavy trains, occasionally hauling consists so protracted that the trailing cars vanished into the winter mist. By the late 1990s, the brick had attained legendary status of a different kind. It was not swift, but it was unfailingly dependable. Crews bestowed upon it monikers such as the Clydesdale and the Mule. When the task mandated sheer power, nothing else sufficed. The final E66 remained operational until 2003, exceeding the expectations of almost everyone who had dismissed them. For a locomotive conceived in a period of exigency and nearly undone by its own characteristics, it found redemption not in speed, but in unyielding, formidable might. Today, the United States continues to deliberate high-speed rail. However, the lessons of the E60 reverberate within every multi-billion-dollar initiative. Engineering shortcuts and political pressures do not forge enduring progress. As Congress contemplates new railway investments, the spectral presence of the brick serves as a reminder that misjudgments in infrastructure development profoundly shape generations. The subsequent hasty undertaking could incur costs significantly exceeding $40 million. The adage, "history repeats itself," often sparks debate. While events never unfold in precisely the same manner, Recurring patterns and themes are undeniable. Societal shifts, political maneuverings, economic downturns, and human reactions frequently echo those of bygone eras. Consider the cyclical nature of economic bubbles and busts. From the Dutch tulip mania of the 17th century to the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s and the 2008 financial crisis, periods of irrational exuberance followed by sharp corrections seem to be a consistent feature of market behavior. The underlying human psychology, greed, fear, herd mentality, remains largely unchanged. Similarly, the rise and fall of empires, the struggles for freedom and equality, and the perpetual conflicts between different ideologies offer compelling historical parallels. While the specific actors, technologies, and geopolitical landscapes evolve, the core motivations and consequences often bear striking resemblances to past epochs. However, interpreting these repetitions is crucial. It's not a mere photocopy. Rather, it's a reinterpretation or variation on existing themes. New technologies, global interconnectedness, and changing ethical frameworks introduce novel elements, ensuring that each repetition carries its own unique complexities and outcomes. Therefore, while history might not literally repeat itself, it often rhymes, providing valuable lessons and cautionary tales for the present.